Put yourself in position to win big on Kentucky Derby Day with the power of daily racing form. Visit shop.drf.com and get past performances, expert picks, betting strategies, clock reports, and more. Again, that's shop.drf.com.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski are taking a look at one of the undercard stakes on Derby Saturday at Churchill Downs. It is race 9, the Grade 2 American Turf, going the mile and the 16th distance on the turf course for the 3-year-olds. And Craig, we've got yet another full field here, some really interesting races on this undercard, this one included. And I do want to say, as you throw up the morning line and field for this race, the morning line maker has it as a race where only 3 horses are going to get bet. I didn't see it that way. This feels like a very competitive race where there are cases to be made for a lot of horses.
Yeah, I would agree. I think an argument can be made that outside the Kentucky Derby, this is the race that many people are most excited for. We've talked about a lot of these 3-year-old turf horses this year and how good they are, the big speed figures they've been running, the impressive performances visually, and we're finally getting to see them all come together in the same race. And I'm just really excited to see this one.
Yeah, some have complained about the quality of the 3-year-olds moving towards the dirt races, the Kentucky Oaks, the Kentucky Derby. Not the case with this American Turf. These are 3-year-old turf horses are running speed figures that are a notch above what we typically see at this time of year. So very interested to see how this all shakes out. Before we get to the contenders, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this race. And Craig, with such a large field, no surprise to see that fast pace flag. But I think part of the puzzle is not deciding if the pace is contested or not, but who is actually going to make the lead. I would predict it's more likely to be the number 12, Fantastic Again, than the number 5, Johannes. Not that Johannes doesn't have tactical speed, but I think Fantastic Again is more of a knee the lead type.
I would agree. I think this is a race where the algorithm didn't get it right. If you look at the lines, Johannes, he's running a lot of sprints, including one on dirt. That's why he's shown on the front end, because he did show speed in those races. But his one time around 2 turns on the grass, he was able to relax in behind a moderate pace. So I actually think he's unlikely to lead. But I do agree the pace will be pretty quick.
And you do see, if it is quick, that number 2, Far Bridge, has the LP flag for the highest late pace rating in the field, a horse that might be able to take advantage if things fall apart on the front end. Let's take a look at the Timeform US finish projector for this race, one of the new features in Timeform US based on the pace projector and the speed figures, the Timeform US algorithm predicting the finish based on that data. And the number 1, Major Dude, shown as the slight winner over the number 4, Talk of the Nation, as well as Carl Spackler in there, as well as Fantastic Again, it's Carl Spackler in there as well. And Craig, what this finish projector says to me is that it's a pretty wide open race with a lot of horses that have run similar speed figures.
Yeah, very. And some of them came on synthetic surface. I think maybe those horses are a tad bit overrated, talking about Major Dude and Fantastic Again. But that doesn't mean I don't think they're contenders, because they're both pretty solid horses.
Well, let's go through some of the main contenders in this race, and we'll begin from the rail with the number 1, Major Dude, and we'll take a look at his last turf race when he ran in the Kitten's Joy at Gulfstream Park. And this was a good effort, Craig. Got a better trip this day than he did in his prior start when he was wired by Candidate, and you could see here he's running down that same rival Candidate to win this race going away at the end. Subsequently came back in the Jeff Ruby Stakes on the Synth, did nearly qualify for the Kentucky Derby, but I think that his connections made the right call to go in this race rather than try to get into the Derby as an AE.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, his one dirt race was uninspiring earlier in his career, the one that we see in the PPs. And you see a nice forward progression in the speed figures. The little bit of question because that last one was on synthetic, but it does fit the pattern that he's improving every time out. He just ran into a horse who was a monster last time in 2 fills.
Yeah, and I think he's facing a better field on the turf than he has in his prior 2 turf races this year, but he's one of those horses that is running speed figures that are certainly above par for what we usually see in this kind of race, so definitely one to consider. Just not sure I'd want to take anything close to that 5-2 morning line on Major Dude. The number 2 is Far Bridge. Let's take a look at his last race when he was running at Gulfstream Park in an allowance race back in March. And that is him in those Calumet silks coming through between horses right there in mid-stretch. And he's going to finish going away at the end. He was a big favorite this day, Craig, going off at 1-2 off a very fast debut victory, which we're not going to show, but I know we're going to talk about when he was hitting the wire with Carl Spackler well ahead of the field. And he just did what he had to do, coming back against an overmatched field in Allowance Company last time. Since then, this horse has been privately purchased. I think the reported purchase price was north of $2 million for this son of English Channel. He's been transferred to Todd Pletcher for this race, gets Joel Rosario, who rode him on debut, back aboard. And one thing we know about Far Bridge, Craig, is he can definitely finish.
Yeah, no doubt he gets a good inside post position in this big field. He should be able to save ground. He's going to have to work out a trip, but as you say, he exited one of the more exciting maiden turf races that you're ever going to see. We'll talk about Carl Spackler later, but you could see the big gap back to third in that race. It was fast on the time, and he backed it up in that allowance race. I was a little surprised they didn't move him right into Stakes Company, but they took their time with him, won another race, and it paid off in that big purchase price. As you say, changes barns. I don't know if I'm a huge fan of that. I mean, it's not like Christophe Clement hadn't done everything perfect with this horse, but he certainly has the ability and is a contender.
Yeah, definitely moving into capable hands for Todd Pletcher. I watched his most recent workout, and it looked, or I should say his last workout in Florida, and it looked good. Todd Pletcher actually put the shadow roll that he had worn for Christophe Clement back on after not using it in a prior work, and this horse just seemed way more dialed in with that equipment. So expecting him to run well, especially if the pace heats up. The number 3 is Mendelssohn's March, and a horse that has only been on the turf once, Craig. It did get put up to win that race via disqualification at Fairgrounds, and he probably was best that day because he was down towards the inside on that Fairgrounds turf course in early February when you probably wanted to be moving outside, got a little interfered with at the end. So I think his one turf race is good. He's just finding himself in a really tough spot.
Yeah, I mean, he showed some ability on dirt as well, as we see. Even his bluegrass wasn't terrible, but it just seems like the wrong field to dive back into the turf waters.
The number 4 is Talk of the Nation. Let's take a look at his most recent victory in the Columbia Stakes at Tampa Bay Downs. And this was an impressive effort. This horse drew the outside post, covered ground around both turns, but you could see once Sammy Camacho asks him for his best in mid-stretch here, this horse switches over to his right lead, lengthens his stride, and puts away a good horse in Mustache to win going away, Craig. And I know this race came back really fast from a Timeform US Speed Figure standpoint.
Yeah, this was one I was very nervous about making the speed figure. There were a bunch of turf races run that day. I timed it just to be sure. The time was good. I'm still a little weary. The 120s maybe a little bit too high, but Mustache has already come back to win out of that race, albeit with a slightly lesser speed figure. It was a good performance and a stakes win at Keeneland. So Talk of the Nation was highly impressive that day. As you say, not just the number, the way he did it from the outside post, mowing down the field. So certainly a contender in here. I seriously doubt he will be anywhere near 10-1.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's vying for favoritism in this race. And frankly, I think he should be, just based on those last 2 turf efforts. And it's not like that 120 came out of nowhere, because he was very impressive in that allowance race prior to it, also earning a speed figure that makes him very competitive here. The number 5 is Johannes. And Craig, let's take a look at his last race in the Pasadena. And I know that sometimes we're often a little down on these Southern California turf stakes. They tend to have some smaller fields, not often the quality that we see on the East Coast or in Kentucky. But this feels like a horse that might be of a different caliber than we typically see shipping over from California for this kind of race.
Yeah, this horse is good. He has some real talent. You could see it in the speed figures. He ran that huge speed figure when he broke his maiden, and it was right up there with the other horses we're talking about who are above par. The question with him was, could he handle the 2 turns? And he did it with aplomb. He just mowed down the field. Granted, it was only 4 horses, but you had to love the way he did it. He ran that big 114 speed figure. So this horse ships in with serious intentions in this race.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the distance for him. He's stretching out to a mile and a 16th. I know he got the mile last time. That was not a competitive race from a competition standpoint. He was just so much better than those horses. He really did come to hand as a sprinter. So we'll see if he can reproduce that form going this distance. But there's no denying that he is one of the most talented turf horses in this field. Let's move on to the number 7, Desert Duke. And he is a horse that's coming off a victory last time out at Keeneland. And it was a pretty impressive one, Craig. Anytime a horse wins a turf race by 5+ lengths, I think you have to take note. And the speed figure was sort of commensurate with what we saw visually. That 112 stacks up favorably against some other horses in this field. We'll see what kind of trip he works out. He got to control on the front end last time, but he's got some talent for a horse that's 30-1 on the morning line.
He does, and that speed figure gave me a little pause. I shouldn't say it gave me pause. It surprised me. But when you watch the race, it certainly matches what we saw. He was able to set the pace. It was, he had to work for it a little bit in the beginning. Then he was left alone, and I think that really helped. But it's not like he was battling it out to the wire. He just pulled away and blew away what was a decent field on paper coming in. So I think that 112 is legit, and he's going to be a big price.
Up next is Mustache. And Craig, it's kind of funny looking at this horse as we check out his last race, a win in the Transylvania where he earned a nice speed figure. And I mean, he could be the 6th or 7th choice in this race. And he's running the kinds of speed figures that would typically make a horse the favorite in the American turf. I think it just speaks to the depth of this race. And it feels like it came up so much tougher than the Transylvania he won last time.
Yeah, I would agree. He's maybe a couple below these, but speed figures are good, no doubt about it. I thought he was a bit of an overlay last time coming out of that Talk of the Nation race, which I talked about was a very fast one. I just wonder if he's going to be able to get a similar trip. It seems unlikely. He's shown that he can rate a little bit off the pace before, but he hasn't been able to win in those efforts. So I just wonder about the trip for him and think things aren't going to work out as nicely as they did at Keeneland.
A couple of others coming out of the Transylvania are drawn towards the outside, including the number 14 Web Slinger. And again, not a bad horse, although he didn't draw a good post position here, stuck towards the outside. He was closing at the end. I kind of want to mention him in tandem with the number 13, and the winner is Craig, who is one that some people might want to bet back off a trip in that race. He got sort of sawed off an upper stretch of that Transylvania, whereas Web Slinger had more of a clear run. But both of these horses would need to improve from outside posts if they were going to be successful here.
Yeah, the post positions are tough. I actually like the Web Slinger in the Transylvania based off the trip he had last time against the pace. And he ran fine that day. You could argue he had a tough trip again. He was wide on the second turn. The winner was a horse who was left alone on the front end. But I just worry about the post position, particularly when he's going to have to run better. I don't like the horse that beat him last time in this spot. So it would be a big leap for me.
Now, the number 11, Carl Spackler, definitely a contender in this race. And we're going to take a look at his maiden victory last time out at Gulfstream Park. And Craig, you just don't see horses break their maidens on the turf like this. I mean, look at this horse. It's like he turned on the jets at the quarter pole. I mean, he's moving at a completely different speed than everybody else. Like the proverbial jumped in at the quarter pole. It feels like it's true with this horse. I mean, and it's not like those that finished behind him were slouches. I mean, we've seen some runbacks from that race, and they've generally been good. So that 112 time formula speed figure, it holds up. The issue is, Craig, when you go back and watch that race that he ran against Far Bridge, I don't know. I think some people have had a difference of opinion about it. Some say Carl Spackler ran better. I thought Far Bridge ran him down fair and square that day. So it just makes me wonder, how good is he and some other horses in this field?
Yeah, I guess you could say he took a jump forward. I didn't think he had any excuse to lose to Far Bridge, but he only lost by a head. Second start, he looked like a much better horse, ran a similar speed figure. He's a very good contender, though. Obvious contender. The one issue for me is he's probably going to take too much money in a field this deep, and he does draw the 11 posts, but when he's trained by Chad Brown, he's not going to be ignored by the bettors.
One more to talk about, the number 12, Fantastic again, and he is a horse that is switching from the synthetic back to turf. He did try the turf once in his career debut at Belmont. That was going 6 furlongs. He's probably a horse that wants no part of that distance. But I think the jury's still out, Craig, about whether he's a horse that prefers the turf or even handles the turf, because it's not always a guarantee that synthetic form is going to translate to grass.
Yeah, we saw what Major Duty ran a big number on synthetic, but he had good grass form. I'm not so sure about Fantastic again. We talked about him on the pace projector. I do think he will be the early leader, but I'm pretty skeptical that he's going to be able to take them the whole way. Given that turf form and just given the depth of this field, I think too many horses are going to be taking a shot at him.
Let's throw up our picks for this interesting American turf. And Craig, I'm not surprised that we have a slight difference of opinion here, because it's a wide open race. There are a lot of horses to like, though I don't disagree with you that the number 5 Johannes seems very talented.
Yeah, I just went price shopping in here in a race this deep. I have no problem with Far Bridge, as you see. I haven't picked second. Carl Spackler right there as well. I worry a little about the post, but in a group this deep and talented, I wanted to take a little more shot at a price. And I think Johannes will be pretty big. I don't know if I'll get the full 15-1, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's double-digit odds.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how this race is bet. I frankly don't know. I think horses like the number 4 Talk of the Nation, who I personally think is the horse to beat in this race. I have him second. I mean, I think he could be one of the favorites. We'll see how that shakes out. I went with the number 2 Far Bridge on top. I just see enough pace in this race to keep things honest up front. And what I know about this horse is that he can finish. We saw that in his debut last time out. I know he beat a weaker field, but I just think this horse has shown some real quality. And Joel Rosario probably just going to save ground and try to get that patented Joel Rosario trip up the inside with this horse, and we'll see if it works out. He's one that I think might drift up from that 7-2 morning line. I think it seems a little short just given the quality in this field, but if he's in that 9-2 range, he's one that I could get very interested in. So that's a look at the Grade 2 American Turf on Saturday at Churchill Downs. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.